Hello and welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Today we are speaking with Jessie Carroll, founder of Jessie Carroll Architect LLC in Portland, Maine. JCA is a boutique architectural firm specializing in custom homes. Jessie has a long-standing reputation regionally and has been recognized as a leading architect. JCA's energetic design approach promotes true client engagement and a distinct connection to place. Our interview today is sponsored by Maine Home Design. Don't miss Carroll's design theory in the upcoming November-December issue of Maine Home Design. Thank you for coming into the studio today, Jessie Carroll. Thanks for coming down to Biddeford to talk to us today. You've had a lot of significant changes, like some of the biggest changes as a professional, going from being in an office to now choosing to go out on your own, taking big risks, with all of your training and experience and everything else. Now it's on you. How's that feel?
So I understand, like, as an outsider, maybe it looked like a huge risk, a huge move, and maybe it was, but it didn't feel like it. It just felt like the next step in the evolution of my career and my sort of being a practitioner in Maine. I think there was never this ultimate vision of having my own practice. Mm-hmm. Of course, I wanted to pursue getting my license as an architect and have that as an option. But I think just where I was in my career, it made a lot of sense. And I wanted to be able to provide the ultimate client experience and process. And having my own company just allows me to do that. So I can focus less on kind of the process. How do you get from that interview to move-in day? As I've sort of ironed that out over the last 9 years of practice in Maine, and focus more on the client experience and having it be an enjoyable process, working with builders that I have long-term established relationships with, and try to keep it as simple of a process and an exciting, gratifying one. So when I started the company, it really just felt like the next best step.
So what are some of the ways that in practice as an architect, things can be unpleasant for the client side of it? What are you looking to avoid and improve, both avoid and improve, with your experience in the past of I've noticed or I've heard stories of this has been difficult for clients. Here's what it is, and here's how I'm going to avoid putting a client in that kind of corner or situation or whatever to make the entirety of that process of design to completion, moving in, that much better.
Yeah, totally. So I feel like architects, capital A, architects have a bad reputation of being ego first. And so I like to be the ego last architect. And I like to remind my clients, hey, you're in the driver's seat. It is my job to bring, vision and great ideas to the table, but ultimately they're making the decisions. Mm-hmm. I think there's, an instinct within the field to, let's build a portfolio, let's do these wild, crazy things, but it's not always right for that particular client, right? Mm-hmm. So budget is one of those items that makes decisions, and really being thoughtful and respectful of where the clients ultimately want to be in their investment in their home through the entire process is something that I love to be thoughtful about and transparent about. And I often feel like the budget police. So, just because you can pull off a really cool detail doesn't mean you should. Right. On every project. It has to be the right fit. So I think, something I really believe in is an honest getting to know of a client in the beginning, lots of listening, lots of Pinterest image sharing, really trying to understand the client and the vision they have of their home, and not to be designing in this vacuum back at the office. So having a lot of meetings in the beginning, and also having presentations that are more workshop based. So coming to that first design presentation with 3 homes and saying, what do you like about what I've presented or dislike? I want to hear the good, bad, and the ugly. And that documents are only to elicit a response, and that I want to hear, what feels distinctly right for them. And I think following that process allows the ultimate product to be a reflection of the client. That really like careful getting to know and listening. And in the beginning, you're just trying to get to know a person like you would in any other circumstance. And then by the end, I know exactly, oh, this client's going to love this. This client's going to hate this. And so it's a really special process, and it's a long one. I'm usually working with clients for a year to design, a year to build, and maybe a year and a half to build. So it's a 2.5 year getting to know a family, and it's huge.
Like from my experience, from what I do, I'm the difference of my creative process and getting to know the client, what the client does, and what the client wants to communicate is a very different thing. There's a lot less investment on my part to actually get to know personally, because it's not that I'm personally working with the personality of the client to transfer that into something that's usable for the client in a personal way. It's more so it can in many ways be described in a couple paragraphs of a general vision, and then it's a collaboration with the client the day of. It's an extremely intense, all in one place, all at one time. There has to be a really high strike rate in a compacted amount of time, where what you do has a lot more drawn out, developing relationship, developing understanding for like a very, very finely tuned thing that becomes just a major, major part of a daily interaction of that person with just consciousness, being alive every single day. It's such a personal thing, and it's one of the very last things that's bespoke every time it's done anywhere on earth, really, if it's done well, right? I mean, we don't really produce bespoke cars or anything else like we do houses. Houses, residences are from the ground up just tailored, but every single little bit of it. I have to imagine that will go the wayside over time with technology getting to the point where we can stamp out homes like we stamp out cars in a way. I wonder how much the practice of architecture will change over the next 50 to 100 years in relation to that. But I'm getting way off track. Sorry about that. But what are the exercises that you use to, because I don't understand, like I come with a very much like my own baggage of, we like what you do, just do what you do, because that shows results for commercial purposes, right? It's a little bit different. And I know that architects can come with that same thing. I imagine more so it's usually in a commercial space where that kind of, you hire an architect and it's like, you do what you do. We have a few requests, but it's less of a thing that would be this personal interaction over time for a very personal end result like a home. What are some of the ways that you go through actually getting to know people and getting to know their desires and their quirks and everything else that translate into a home that are very effective in getting into that person's head? I mean, do you have to spend just a lot of time just hanging out, or like, how's that really work?
Yeah, I wish I had all that time.
Right.
So
thank you for hanging out. Here's your bill.
Yeah, totally. So I think often clients are coming to you for a reason, right? Like they've seen your portfolio, they know your reputation. There's going to be some stylistic alignment from the beginning. Otherwise, Why would they call, right? But I would think that my history as an architect in Maine has been quite broad, stylistically. So I do have a broad range of clients coming into my office now. So I have clients that are very traditional and very coastal and very shingle style in a modern way. And then I also have other clients that are like, you'll do a flat roof for me, right? I want this like modernist moment in Maine. Right. And for me, I'm not necessarily hung up on it needs to be one way. It's really, again, hoping it's a reflection of the client and let me do what I do, which is coming up with or helping advise on that holistic vision, and then making sure every detail is tied in and executed beautifully.
Right.
So that the end result is like a very quiet piece of architecture that's not trying to do too much. And it's reflective of the client's needs, style aside, right? So I think there's, from a style standpoint, I think people do come to you for your expertise and what they see in your portfolio. And for me, it's getting that proportion right, executing on detail, having certain things resolved in the right way. For me, that's architecture. And so understanding what is going to light a person up from their design preferences. In the beginning, it's, I want that wish list and reality list. Tell me everything about what you want in that home, lifestyle included.
Right.
Like, where do you spend your mornings? What's your favorite part of the day? I want to hear lifestyle included in that wish list. And then it's the reality. Like, when do you want to move in and how much do you want to spend? And it's my job to help them rectify those two aspects, that
right.
wish versus reality, and have really honest, transparent conversations, like from the interview. And then I ask to image share, like, what's in your head?
Right.
Share with what you have. And I started doing, and I actually riff this from a landscape architect I work with all the time. They do Pinterest meetings, and they march through potential look and feel and just try to get a response from a client. So I do that with my clients, like, march me through some images you love. Tell me what you love about them.
Do you ever reference, like, show me something that you dislike? Because a lot of times the way I work about, the way I learn about my work is sometimes I'll take an image and I'll hate it. And I study, why do I hate that? And that, it sounds like a very negative process, but it's also like, I'm avoiding this because of XYZ. And it helps inform, like, some boundaries as I'm shooting in the future, principally.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's equally helpful. I think when you have someone talk to an image, you just learn so much. So I did this recently with a client, and I saw a lot of gambrel roof lines, which is like my least favorite roof line of all time. And so I'm like, oh boy. But every image, she was responding to something other than the roof. And had I just looked at the Pinterest without her vocalizing what appealed to her, I would have thought, oh, she wants a gambrel roof house.
Right.
And that wasn't right. So yeah, it's really that dialogue and getting comfortable with a client and a person so that they feel that they can show up to that first meeting and have a voice. And that's my whole thing. I want people to be really in on the process. For me, like, my favorite clients are the ones with opinions. I want to hear about what they love and how I can kind of exceed expectations.
Right.
So I love clients that, are bringing opinions, thoughts, and visions to the table, because, then I can really execute. Sometimes I present and it's poker face and you're like, oh no, like, do you love it? Do you hate it? You know?
That's a hard read sometimes. Like, I had a friend who just delivered a job. He's a commercial photographer out in California, and he delivered it like 3 days later, like, no response from the client.
Oh
it's
my
just
gosh.
like, do they hate it? Or what's going on?
Oh my God, yes.
Turns out the guy came down with COVID. So he
Oh.
just, had been under the weather, and he's like, oh, okay. But yeah, you're always looking for that, like, if it's great, tell me, please. If it's bad, okay, let's talk about it. But, like, nothing is just poker face is like,
Yeah.
okay.
I always say, we're just as good as the feedback. So, if the more concise you can be in your communication and what's working and not working, and that goes throughout the whole process. Like, that's with builders, that's with consultants, and with clients. Like, the more effective you can be in your communication, usually the more streamlined and better the outcome.
So you said the word builder, which in my mind triggers the question, being rather feminine, how's it been working with builders? Is that an issue still to this day? Is it getting considerably better? Is it, if you have anyone who's male with you, do they only talk to the male and avoid? I know I've heard all these stories. I haven't experienced myself, although we do get stink eye if we come on to any building site as someone who's not dressed in work clothes. You just get the immediate stink of who's this new person here. But how is it working with contractors and everything else in this day and age?
Man, I could do a whole podcast on that for you. No, so I would say the teams that I work with now are like top notch guys. Like the respect in the field is huge. Mm-hmm. And not just from the general contractors, from the subs. My background is construction. I was managing construction before I came to Maine. And that's where
gotta be a hard job. I mean, period, no matter who you are. If something gets done, it's hard to do and gets done wrong. And then you have to tell people, take it out, do it over. I couldn't do that.
Totally. Well, I have like a process, right? So when I go onto job sites, I'm pretty overly enthusiastic about work in place. If it looks amazing, everyone knows. And I think there's that positivity and enthusiasm is contagious on a job site. And when they see Jessie is stoked, they work harder. And then when you have to say, hey, that doesn't look right, which I don't say, I always ask questions. Hey, does this look right to you?
You're so much more intelligent about your social interactions than I would be.
Well, it's really reflective. I didn't go into it thinking like, this is how I'm going to perform on a job site. It's just a realization of, wow, that worked out well. And I used to coach colleagues, and that's what I would say. Let's pose things as questions. Mm-hmm. And great general contractors, great frame crews, great trim guys. If you ask the question, like, does that look right? How are you feeling about this? Like,
they kind of
they're
immediately
smart
look
and they know, and they're like,
she saw it.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Exactly. Or, some of these teams I've worked with on many, many homes. So, I was working with a framer and he put something up and he knew I wasn't going to like it. So he screwed it in place and said, Jess, what do you think? And we worked through it. Right. So it's those relationships that are great. But
the other thing is, at the level that you're working at, the contractors at that level care so much, I would think, about what they're doing that I'd imagine you run into very little that you're really having to hurt people's feelings over or getting them upset about. Because, I mean, the contractor that we used, he doesn't do a lot of work. He builds so he can be a farmer.
Yeah.
But he was so invested in our project just because it had green aspects to it and everything else, and that's just kind of his mission. Like, we didn't have to care or think about anything. I mean, my wife she was the general contractor essentially and handled all the subs and everything else with it. But we knew that if Noah was involved, it was getting done right, period.
Yeah.
And he had more passion and direction towards doing it right than we would have placed on him to begin with, which was just like, all right, great. That's one area that we don't have to worry about. It's so good. And then the guys at Caleb's office, Daryl and stuff that did all the drawings, just detailed everything out because they were passionate about that. So it's like the only issues we had were, areas where I really was trying to cut cost and people came in that did work that they were proud of, but for different types of projects. And it was mostly my fault for misaligning what, I brought in. But yeah, I'm wandering way off topic there again. But anyways, I have this policy usually where if I disagree with a client, and you tell me how you do it when you're working, I would think would be interesting. But a lot of times I'll suggest something and a client just won't pick up on it. And I have the idea that I say it twice. And if they don't pick up on it or they disagree twice, I had 2 chances. The third strike is just theirs and it's on them and that's their choice. What if you see a client going down a road that this is bad because of this, that, and the other, and you can even kind of describe it to them like this is bad because of this, that, and the other, and they're still insistent on it, what do you do in that case?
So I like to show what they're asking for.
Okay.
Draw through it, show them what they're asking for, and then show them another opportunity. And if ultimately that's what they want, not my house, you know? All right, we'll go through with it. Of course, something that has nothing to do with life safety or, as long as it's not, against code, right? It's ultimately not my home. And, I say it all the time, like, this might not be the most functional solution, But selfishly, as an architect, I would love to see this.
Right.
If you're going to be cursing
You're that
me,
open with them?
Oh yeah. I'm like, if you're going to be cursing me 2 years from now, we won't do it. So
right.
What do you think? So yeah, I think just really being honest and open with clients is really helpful. But I don't want to walk away from your question earlier about being a female in the construction world, because I will say that has shifted dramatically in the last 10 years. Yep. So when I started as an architect in Maine, it was kind of old guard builders, and it was way more challenging. And it meant a lot that I had a older male boss that would come around with me for the moments when it got heavy.
It's just sad that it's like, bring your daughter to work day. You feel that way.
Totally. And I think he dealt with it perfectly. He would know the answers to the questions and look at me and say, Jess, what do you think? To make sure everyone on the site knew who was managing and designing that project.
Yeah. He's like, I've got a lot of trust in this person. She's great at this. If you guys have a problem with it, you could maybe find a different, architecture firm to work with.
Totally. And I, to this day, when I'm talking with new potential builders and always trying to grow kind of collaborators, I ask to meet with their project managers. I ask to meet with the person that I'm going to be meeting with on a weekly basis and make sure that the rapport is right. Because nobody wants a conflict relationship through a build. I mean, that's disastrous. Yeah. So making sure, doing the homework, qualifying builders, but also making sure it's a great match. Because I have a ton of respect for the guys in the field, and I want that to be as smooth as the design.
Yeah. There's so much social intelligence there that's so important in making that a project where at the end it's not where the owners hate the architect and hate the builder and the builder hates it, to have that social intelligence and be able to navigate that. Again, that's like somewhere where I will never succeed. Okay. Like my wife managed all the building and the building of the barn and everything else. She did the house, and then we built a barn, and I was like, all right, I can figure this out. And I just such a lack of talent of getting out of people what you need to get out of them. I can do what I need to do. I can push myself into the ground. I can do it. If it's just me, I'll figure it out. I don't have problems.
Right.
But if I have to interact with someone that I got to pull it out of them, that gets really, really difficult for me because I just don't have that natural ability. I can learn. I can appropriate behaviors that will help that whole thing. But when I do those behaviors, it feels like I'm pandering or talking down or, but it's just a level of courteousness where I prefer a very direct, this is wrong. You need to do that over. Why? Because of this. You're right. Okay. I'm good. But I expect the treatment that I would like in a situation like that. I return that to people, but it's not received in the same way because it's too abrupt. It's too harsh.
Totally.
And people just get a little, I don't like this guy, and
I will say, as a female, I have a softer give. So I can say something pretty blunt, pretty direct, but end of the day, it's through a smile and through my little Jessie body, so people give you a lot of leeway and, I can say what I need to say and it's generally received quite well. So yeah, I think I have that working for me. Right. But I think it's so interesting to just see where we are in this conversation because we're not even talking about architecture or design. There's all of these soft skills that are required to get a house built. So yes, the drawing is important. Yes, the documents are important and the design is important, but you really need, such a well-rounded skill base to get from A to B, to get from that interview to someone moving in. It's really tons of decisions to make. So many hands are in a build, so many consultants and team members to work with. So it is largely those soft skills and trying to get folks to perform at their highest level consistently. That's part of the game.
So my thinking and what we were kind of talking about earlier, the idea of some clients can push a little more shingle or a little more minimalist or a little more brutalist, whatever. But then there's your kind of personal preference. And it seems like the more ego in an architect, the more consistent the aesthetic outcome from
Sure.
project to project to project,
Yeah.
which can be very marketable. Like you can
Yeah.
get into a niche and you can say, oh, that building over there, that's a Jessie and this is a Carroll, that's a Caleb, or this is a Rob,
Yeah.
that having that like stamp, it directs you back to that initial ego that created that thing. Now, is that wrong or right? There might be some people that just say, that's my look, that's my thing, I want that every time, but it's going to be slightly adjusted to fit my life. Whereas the ability for someone to say, I like the overall, like, I think it's a gradient, like some firms have like just absolutely identifiable every time. And it comes back to that kind of singular design vision that I think is probably more carried through like the shell of an ego, essentially. Where if you can have this idea of it's a little more, there's obviously these are connected, but they're not so railroaded into this, clear aesthetic. The gradient moves more towards understanding and meeting the needs of the client and less meeting the ego of the architect, maybe.
Totally.
And not to say that one is right or wrong, because the ego might fit where the other has very, very unclear direction and really even a clear idea of what they want, other than they relate to this aesthetic and they love it and they just want it.
Totally. I think a large part of that is staying relevant, right? So there's like thinking about the long game, right?
Yeah.
And so if you are kind of targeting one sort of look, I just wonder about the relevance in the long run. So many architects that I respect and like am awed at their work, you go back to kind of their initial small projects and they're absolutely incredible. And like in many ways uncomparable to like the huge stuff they're doing at the peak of their career. And so for me, I still think when you walk into a Jessie house, you know it. And you've been in a lot of houses and photographed them that I've designed. And though they look so different, I feel like the hand is there. Like everything is resolved and tight, but not stark. I think there are some architects that are trained
there's
so
a percentage
rigorously.
of stark, but there's a definite percentage of warmth in your work that
Yes.
I cannot even clearly like articulate visually in my own head, like specifically that, but the feeling is there. And the feeling
100%.
is minimal but warm.
Totally. Yeah, it is hard to articulate. And I've worked with many people and I'll walk through their homes and I'm like, you can just tell the hand who drew it. And I feel like when you walk into a home that I've designed, you can feel it, even if it looks different because of the rigor or execution.
Right. Interestingly, we were just shooting over in Blue Hill Wednesday. Incredible project. But they had a kitchen that was made by, I want to say it's a Swedish company or something, that did this really not tiny house, but smaller modular, like glass and black steel. It's been published a lot.
Yeah.
But as soon as I saw this modular kitchen in this, like very, it was a yacht club, and it had these stone kind of pillars around it that kind of encompass a outdoor porch, and then they put in this very minimalist sliding glass wall inside, and it's like right over the water. It's really incredible. But the whole thing, amazing. The detail of the glass dormers, amazing, very European feel to it. But then this kitchen is like, man, that thing feels like this house that I saw in this book a while ago. Turns out it's the exact same company. They're just moving into doing what they did with that house into like creating these modular kitchens and stuff. And it's something like Stiga, or it's not Stiga, but it's like an S. There's a T, maybe a P in there somewhere. But it was interesting. The DNA was there, like you're saying, from the house that I have in my mind that I saw. I related to that, and I was like, the DNA is there. You can see it. Like
Totally.
And then they're like, yeah, and they did this house that was like, and I was like, was it like this with that and that? And they're like, yeah, that's it. So it's interesting that the commonality of that really comes across through the thinking, the experience, the vision. You feel it in the DNA from one to the next. And I wonder the identity of the architect and what they put their value on, and how much of that DNA is present from project to project. Is it in the, like, it would be harder to identify it if the skill of the architect was primarily meeting the needs of the client and servicing them best, because you'd have to get to know the client as they relate to the space to then get the story of how much does this house meet your needs, which is maybe an interesting marketing angle. Money. Sorry.
Well, we used to walk through people's homes as part of like the getting
They're
to
existing
know.
before.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great, yeah.
Yeah, because I think people are like, I want modern, and then you look at their furnishings, what they're bringing in and what they call modern, and you're like, whoa, this isn't going to look right, or oh, we don't need that much storage space, and their garage is chock full, or the basement's chock full, and it's not going to go in a dumpster, right?
People don't really change mostly, so.
Totally. So yeah, real acknowledgement of, this is life and it has to work for you. And, also it's a helpful, again, point of dialogue to say, tell me about what's working for you in this house and what's not, and how can we do better? What spaces do you love? And it's just honest getting to know. And then you have a consistent language when you start the design process. So we can say, this is about 5 feet bigger than your existing living room, or this is about the size of your office at home. It is a helpful part of the process. When we were able to do that, I think a lot of the clientele that I work with now aren't necessarily local with their primary residence, or the house they're living in prior to moving to Maine. So that becomes more challenging and not as consistent as it used to be. But.
So going out on your own, how's it been handling the stress of taking that risk? Because, no matter what, it's always some amount of managed risk. And then you had spoken about you've hired someone. Walk me through that entire process over the last probably 6 months or so since I last worked with you, that you've gone through that whole transition maybe.
Yeah. So it's been about a year since I started the company, and it was more of it didn't feel risky because I have felt so confident in the work that I was doing that it was just under a different name in a different place, but still doing the same work. So I felt very confident in what I was about to do, and didn't feel like, oh my God, I have to get a bank loan, or I need capital, or I need this, I need that. Starting an architectural practice is pretty tight from an investment standpoint. And it was really just finding clients.
Now, what do you mean by that? It's pretty tight from an investment.
You can start a firm for under $10,000. You don't need,
So it's mostly your own abilities and vision and ideas of what you can create and how you can service people. So there's not a huge amount of capital needed for overhead other than supporting yourself starting out.
Totally. It's like computers, software. You're not having to like open a store and buy
brick and mortar crazy
exactly have a huge
inventory.
Thank you. Yeah, 100%. So, the startup costs were pretty limited. I had a healthy savings going, and for me, it was just like finding that clientele. And so I kind of told myself, I'm going to spend the summer lining up work for the next year. I want to get, I forget how many projects I wanted, maybe 3 to 6 projects. That was my goal. And because of my reputation in Maine and at my last company, we were just, clear that I was leaving, and people who had followed me for 8 years were reaching out like, oh my God, what an opportunity. Can we finally work with you? And great. So.
Now, did you meet those goals, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, like that times 2 or 3. So
nice.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think, I didn't feel risky. It didn't feel like I was jumping off a cliff, but the rate in which I was signing contracts was kind of like,
oh,
maybe I was feeling nervous because I just was like, really lining up the work.
Well, your lack of anxiety in doing that is very foreign to me and hard to understand, because I think I'm very open and entrepreneurial as a personality, but I'm not very brave in taking especially financial risk in that way. My wife was working as a physical therapist and we didn't have kids. There's just no risk involved in starting what I started, other than I'm not banking money for retirement currently. I was pretty risk free, so I just had the ability to just keep my head down and keep trying. But I didn't have anything too much munching behind me, coming for me. And it's interesting, and I didn't have any confidence in my skill starting out, because I was not trained as a photographer. I had no established history or past or anything. So maybe that's why I felt more risk and everything in doing a similar thing in what going out completely on your own. And sorry to make it self-referential all the time, but all I have to process what other people go through is my experience and trying to relate. So,
no, that's totally right on. Like, I think that really adds a perspective, because that's exactly right. There was no one relying on me financially. I had finally paid off the student debt. I had finally, I was actually living in a barn in Phippsburg. My house was rented out. Like, an income stream was right there. I live in a multi-unit, so I've never had to pay a mortgage, so
that's a really responsible and smart way to go about all this.
Yeah. So
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the cat was the only one who was relying on me at the time. So
more Meow Mix, please.
Yeah, exactly. So it didn't feel like a huge financial risk. I think my parents were really concerned for me. When
you called your parents and told them, what'd they say? And then I'll tell you what my dad said.
How are you going to get health insurance? Was the first question.
Really?
Yeah. And what about your 401k? They both, hugely supportive, but both worked for very well-established companies.
Yep. And
they were of that generation where you had a job and you had it for 30, 40 years and you retired, and the company took care of you. Mm-hmm. And so there was no scent of entrepreneurship or mindset in the family at all. And it wasn't something I even possessed. I was always fiscally conservative. But
because of that fiscal conservativeness, you made a foundation for yourself that's conservative and smart.
Totally.
You don't have a lot of risk because you worked for a good amount of time. You had savings. You set yourself up to have your housing and everything. I mean, you've got to buy food and wardrobe at this point to just look professional and not starve to death. And
Totally. Yeah. And now they're kind of watching, oh my God, I can't believe you're doing this.
We can't believe you can do this, sweetie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, do you have more siblings than your twin?
So I had a childhood nanny growing up that I consider my second mom, and she has two daughters. So I really see myself as having three sisters, and two of which are very kid focused right now, are having small kids. So yeah, I think we have kind of a strong female presence.
Well, I'm thinking from your parents' perspective. If you only have two kids and they're twins, I'd imagine it would be hard to watch one do one thing and one do a very different thing. But I imagine your personalities are strikingly different. I would assume. I don't know.
Totally.
But so I imagine that would be some pushback as well. But just even having, my two little boys who are not twins and of 3 years apart, 2.5, I view them both so differently. I wonder how I would view them if they were a set of twins. Would I expect the same? I don't know. That's
yeah. Being a twin is wild, but she definitely has two amazing, beautiful children and has taken all of the pressure off of me. So that's been lovely. And I've got to be an aunt, which is the most special experience of my life.
Yeah. When they get crabby, you can just hand them back.
Leave and, really learn to mother through my sister. So incredibly a special time for the both of us. But yeah, it's been interesting. She's really taken on those roles and kind of allowed for me to kind of do what I do in a way that doesn't feel pressured.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
So that the hiring process and everything, finding someone that you can work with.
Yeah.
I had no clue how to do that, and luckily just stumbled into working with the best guy to work with for what I needed in probably all of New England. He's got his headphones on, so he can't hear me. But and that was just luck. I absolute luck. How I imagine you're far more intelligent than me about that, and like, because you've gone through actual real full interview process and everything else, I would assume. Yeah. How do you go through that?
Yeah, well, I think like labor shortage is like a consistent theme across so many industries right now. But
you're like in an intellectual labor realm too, right, which is a whole nother thing.
And so like well positioned and networked within the architectural community in Portland that I thought for sure when I said I was hiring, I would just be getting stacks of resumes and people interested. And it was like crickets, which was interesting. So I went about, the typical like job postings, and hoping to find folks to come work for me. And, that was really challenging. I think a lot of people, applying from out of state with very different expectations of the industry and compensation and everything else. And I really wanted someone who saw the potential of what it means to come in at the ground floor and who are wired like me, like self-motivated individuals that sees an opportunity. I was so lucky in my career to be surrounded by incredible mentors, like at every firm I sat at. I just felt like I was always surrounded by people who saw my potential before I did. And I just want to be that person for the next generation. So for me, it was not only just like hiring to fill a need, but also like, where's the next Jessie? Like, how can I train that next generation, teach them everything that I know, and then hopefully have them be better than I am. And so that was like a very specific.
That's a note about ego right there that I've seen destroy other companies, that they have a hard time handling anyone coming on that has more talent than them.
Totally. And also like the last few years, firms have just exploded in the amount of employees that they've brought on. And I don't think that the training has been able to keep up with that. I think when you go from a 4-person office where each person can operate in a silo to a like 15 to 20, and now you need office standards, and now you need all of like the classic commercial like pyramid scheme of architectural firms, that's a very hard transition to make because the firm was never built on office standards. And now all of a sudden you need them. And the old guard is like, what? I'm going to now have to draw like the new people draw, which is, very techie. Right. It's challenging. So for me, it was more like, I always want to be a small firm. And I always want to be surrounded by people who are positive, enthusiastic, energetic, hard workers, and really want to be doing what my previous mentors have done for me, which is really allow the space for other people to rise within. Right. And if ultimately that means, I'm designing less homes per year and my employees are stepping up and designing homes with their authorship, like that's beautiful. And teaching kind of the hand and like proportion and how a building comes together, which we don't learn in our education, and we hardly learn in big offices, and you learn in the field and you learn by really close mentorship. So I'm really excited I was able to find someone, but the irony is that person came through, an Instagram post, after all of the kind of standardized job listings, et cetera, et cetera. It's luck, as you suggested.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So how are you going to stay small? And because for one, you're very talented, and you seem to have started your business in a very conservative manner, which means you're going to stick around even if it's difficult for a while, which is great. But the problem is that you'll probably get a lot of requests for a lot of work very quickly, and it'll be tempting to take that, which will mean hiring more people, which will mean a disillusion of the quality of what you do, potentially, not necessarily. How are you going to stay small?
Yeah, so I think it's just saying no and really being honest with folks. Like, this is, a small firm with limited capacity, and it has to be the right fit, and being selective. And luckily, we're in a time where you can be selective in the work. It's not always going to be this great.
That's a hard one to know. Mm-hmm. Like, right now we have a lot of work, but what about 3 years from now?
Absolutely.
And the economy and the craziness of everything that such an incredible time of rapid change for everything that we do.
Totally. And I'm not the only person that started a firm in Portland, Maine during COVID. I mean, there's a lot that kind of have come up, within Portland alone. I'm sure there's many more across the state that have started. And so you're kind of looking around like, can we do this forever? Like, are all of us going to survive like this next era of architects? But for me, I know my strengths and I know what I'm good at. And that is client facing and builder facing. Mm-hmm. And that's where I shine. And so I cannot hand off the work to others. So I want to be in a space and in a company where I continue to do what I do best, which is getting to know my clients, being on the job site as an authority, really, really involved in the process. And so I want to create an atmosphere where that's possible and not handing off work to others in a way that's inappropriate. So that's my goal, to stay small. And I think clients are smart. They do their research. They call your references. They want that really curated experience and know when they interview, like, you get the principal. That's right. Really important to me.
So you're, I don't know, close to my generation, but you're younger than me. Mm-hmm. What level of guilt do you have for simply charging more to stay small? Is that a thing in the current community mindset and anything else? Because that's been my approach to say, I really want to do what I do, but I don't want to exacerbate myself and not have any energy left for my family or enough time to just stay healthy. But I need to capitalize on what time I do have and what energy I do have to put into doing what I'm good at to provide for my children and my home and a retirement. And I looked at it and I could hire more people to do more things, but that takes a huge amount out of me because first of all, it's not my skill set. I'm not a manager. I'm horrible at it. It takes quite a bit of mental energy to keep myself on a track that's comfortable for other people who have to work with me. And so I thought about that and it's just not good. So I kept thinking, like, just do the best work you can and just keep charging more. And when people start to back off because it's too expensive and they have the kind of work that you want, you're getting to a place where you probably shouldn't be charging more than that right now. And if you're really busy, you have an opportunity to say no by charging more than you typically would, to say, look, if I'm going to fit this in, it's going to cost me more. And that the ability to create comes from your subjective experience, which sounds weird, I think, but it definitely is taking a part of you to create anything. And it's not that it's gone and you don't get that back, but it requires experience, contemplation, and time to even be able to get to a point to do what you're doing. And every time you do that, there's an exhaustion that I feel at the end of every day that we're actually shooting. That's an intense mental exhaustion that unless you do it, you don't really understand. The kind of intensity that I think an architect deals with also brings in a lot of different stresses. Like, if I do this wrong, it could be a safety issue. It could be a massive financial issue. There's all these different stresses that come in with what you do. But now I've just completely forgotten where I even started with that comment that I'm going off
I'll
on.
help you. So first of all, I will say photo shoot days for me too, when I get to work with people like you, are also the most exhausting days that I have on my calendar, because you're like trying so hard for a whole day to capture something.
You just get that window and it's like,
yes,
if we mess this up.
Totally. It's so stressful, and it always works out like magic. But yeah, those are huge days.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
It makes me feel better about how I feel at the end of those days.
Yeah, well, you're trying to do so much in such a condensed time, and you really get literally like one shot. So
it was actually 10 times worse this last Tuesday because the project was so incredible. The scouting shots that I had seen, I was busy when I looked over them, and I was like, oh, it's a renovation of an existing very traditional looking structure, and I didn't catch that this is an amazing location, amazing piece of architecture. And when we got there, I was just like, oh crap,
yeah,
this is insane. I mean, it was just, they lucked into the client and the location like nobody's business. I mean, not lucked, they're an incredibly talented firm, but that idea is like there was an intense responsibility in that moment. Like, this is the opportunity here it's just above and beyond most anything I'd ever seen at that point. And it was just like, whoa, okay.
No pressure.
No pressure. Yeah, there's just so much more pressure at that point. But
yeah, and I think you also asked about like charging, and do I feel bad about charging more? I think that's what I've learned the most in starting a company, or where I really screwed up. And I think you learn the most from where you screw up, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So, again,
I've learned so much.
Right, exactly. And the financial end of having a business is where I felt the least educated. So I hired bookkeepers, a CPA, a business advisor, a retirement fund advisor, like all of these financial people like watching me. So that I could feel comfortable in doing what I'm doing. But the first conversation that I had with a small business advisor, she made the point, which I found to be extraordinarily smart, and then felt silly for not understanding it, was, I work hourly. And she said, Jess, your hourly rate needs to cover not only like what you need to bill, but it needs to cover the cost of running a business. And I was like, oh shit. I signed all these contracts at such a low rate. Because I think what's challenging is that I'm not charging more than the field. And because I'm hourly and I'm one person, right? And so you go to these team meetings, and there's 4 people from the landscape architecture team, 3 people from the interiors team, and every person is hourly. And, having come from a larger firm, you have 4 people at the table, and each one's hourly. And so those fees add up tremendously fast. So as one person at the table, my fee is 1/4 of what everyone else is charging at an hourly rate. And then when you set it low, because some days you play principal and some days you play drafter, so for me, that was just a huge learn. Like, Jessie, you have to bill to run the business. And I don't know why I hadn't thought of that initially. But I think, that's something where you learn as you go.
Yeah.
And I never wanted to kind of bill for percent of construction, especially in such a volatile market. But for the little nimble guys like myself, it begins to make sense, because, my value is not 1/4 the folks at the table. It's you want to be able to charge what is within the industry standard. And so if you are going to be a one-person team, then the model kind of does need to shift. And so it's something I've thought about, and something I'm learning. And I haven't figured it out yet, but it's something that people aren't talking about enough within the industry for obvious reasons. We can't talk about bill rates or talk about kind of setting the standards, because that's like collusion or something.
See, ignorantly, I disagree. You're an artist at a foundational level. What they're paying you for is creation, and to some degree, depending on your amount of ego that goes in, then artistry in combining need with creative solution. And for people, for one, that can afford to pay someone to specifically think about, design, and deliver a home, as compared to, cookie cutter stamped out, I can afford that. You're then, as the person with the funds to find someone special to make your special home, they shouldn't be bargain shopping when they come to your door, right? They should be going to someone who is confident and valuable and knows it, but also has the comfort from the amount of money that they are able to charge to say, I am taking the time with this project that it deserves. And I'm not so stressed that I have to only bill you for these hours and then run over here and do that. I'm not going to be flustered and stressed out, because a lot of what I do comes from creativity, which is my experience involved in this. And if I'm only charging so little so I can retain you as a client because I only charge you a little, the thinking there to me doesn't, and I'm not saying that's specifically what you're saying. When I look at it that way, when I was starting out, I was like, I can only charge this amount. And now I look at it as like, I hope I'm the most expensive person out there because I'm busy.
Yeah.
And if people are willing to pay and I'm busy and they're still paying that, then that means they see me as valuable enough to do that. And when that starts to trickle off, to pull that back. But starting out, it was difficult to justify, like, I'm just not worth that. There's this imposter syndrome 100%. That you constantly struggle with.
Yeah.
But you're doing a creative exercise, and it's pulling from experience. It's not something that you can mechanically deliver. It's not a like taking out, the header, replacing the gasket, putting that back on. Are all the boxes checked and it will run because it's a mechanical thing? Yeah, good. That's a set fee. Sure. But what you do is artistry at some level, creative all the time. And there's a different structure that I've found emotionally relating to it and socially interacting with that dynamic. And like my friend in California that's a commercial photographer, he has a different emotional relationship to asking for the value in a monetized version. Like he emotionally has a hard time with that relationship. I don't have a hard time with that for some reason, but I think it comes from the confidence of like having my wife was backing us, and there wasn't enough risk for me to say, I don't know if I should charge. I just like, that's what it is. Totally. And I'm going to do my best. And if you think it's great, great. And every time you get that, then you're like, And especially like when the big clients come and you name a price that you think is high and they immediately take it, then you're like, oh no, did I leave money on the table? Like how valuable do they think I am? Is it different? And it's a whole weird conversation about essentially an abstracted form of value that's delivered in weird little pieces of paper. It's nothing other than the value that people assess towards what you do. And what you do is in many ways indefinable only by its end result is the definition. And they're paying you for potential. They're paying you on potential based on what you've done in the past. I don't know. I was like, you're in a dangerous area if in a field like yours that you're charging as a technician. Like anyone can be trained to do this. If that's the case, set a price and have an industry standard, fine. But I think the reputation justifies the fee.
Totally.
As a creative exercise.
Yeah, there's this famous architect story, quote, whatever, that I'm going to blank on where it came from and probably summarize terribly, but
it's better that you don't say where it's from, because then you can't be
yeah,
criticized.
then I can't be held accountable. But basically, you know, there's an architect who's very well known and respected at the table, and he comes to a, you know, does a sketch and comes to a solution very quickly, and you know, under a few minutes, right? And so, what is the value of that? Like that looks so easy. Like, well, of course, he just came to the conclusion, but what's behind that is like 30 years of practice. Mm-hmm. Like, of course you came to that solution quickly. Yeah. And we used to talk about this in my last office. It's like the obvious solution is the right solution. Like if you walk into a space and you're like, well, of course it was supposed to be this way, then you nailed it.
Right.
But that comes with like experience and intuition, and how do you put a value on that?
Right.
You know, it's years of practice. It's you know, some people just have that eye and vision, and others not so much, but it's hard to quantify, right?
Yeah, what you're doing is essentially a novelist writing a novel specifically for a single client. Mm-hmm. You don't pay for a book at that point, which can be like $5.95 in paperback. You're writing one novel for one person. It's as if you just, you know, and so it's a totally different price structure. But I've seen what you're talking about with the napkin and the value there. Work. Another friend of mine who's an architect and I went and helped a friend up in Norwalk who was taking a barn and turning it into a house. And the friend who's an architect went in and, you know, looked at it, looked what they had drawn up, and was just kind of like, this isn't going to work. And then just start sketching. And in 10 minutes, they were like, oh, well, yeah, that's obvious. And it was night and day different, like such glaring issues that the people that didn't have the experience couldn't see it. But because of, you know, 25 years or how many, you know, of experience and training, can identify the issues right there that no one else can see. Yeah. It's like going through the forest with someone who like knows the forest and know where each animal is going to be. Like my kids can go through the forest and they're like, that's where the raccoon lives. There he is. There's the porcupine and there's the kingfisher. And I wouldn't have never seen these things because I don't spend the time and the experience, and they just get them like that. And that same person has done stuff like that with me, like on a napkin. He's like, that's worth $5,000.
Yeah, totally.
He gets it. He understands it, but he's just direct like that. And it's just funny to be around that. But it's exactly what you're saying. Like all that subjective background turns into what you notice and what you can create that quick. I personally view it as like reality for me as a map that I fill in with experience. And in a weird way, I make a map of reality. And if someone has a problem over here and the solution is over here, and I'm asked to connect the two, if I've had enough experiences where my map is filled in between those two, I can connect them and I can creatively offer a solution. And in that way, it's all that training, all that experience, all that mentoring, all of that turns into, yeah, that sketch on a napkin is worth $5,500 or whatever it is, like just for that concept, you know, but again, like people have a hard time sometimes with, you know, accepting that what they just did is nothing other than sketching a representation, but the value is everything behind it that made it possible to do that, which is hard to accept at some point. So, and easy to criticize. So
totally. Yeah.
Weird there. We have like quite a few 10 questions that have been asked to ask you here that we should probably make sure that we've at least talked about already. So how do you initially start your design process with clients?
So I think we chatted a little bit about that. So, you know, prior to even the interview, it's like I want the wish list and the reality list, and really understanding, like, are there realistic expectations out of the gate? Mm-hmm. And that's, you know, a conversation or two. And sharing of knowledge that I have within the industry. You know, to do this, it's going to be X or Y.
Which, like 3 months ago was one price, and today
100%.
It's like 5 times more.
Yes, especially when it's this volatile. It's such an important conversation. So yeah, it's really just like gathering that data, sharing images, beginning that dialogue back and forth, and then
when you get the first email from like, hey, we love your stuff and we'd like, at that point, is it essentially, let's have lunch, or like, you want to come and meet in my office, or I'll come and meet you at your existing home usually?
It's usually send me that wish list, reality list.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah, truly, like let's have this conversation and make sure that this is a good fit for both of us. That's
how much time do you have to invest not getting paid to determine if you're the right fit with someone?
It's usually pretty quick.
Yeah.
It's a feel thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, one, are the expectations reasonable? Are these folks I want to work with? Is this not a property that I think is interesting? Do I see potential within the architecture and the potential of the project that I find interesting? And is it a good mesh of personalities? And that's really, what you're trying to assess out in the beginning. So, clients are interviewing you, you're interviewing them, and just trying to figure out, is this going to be a great experience? And part of that is, are they willing to work with the landscape architect? Are they willing to hire a level builder? Are they interested in design from the outside in? Like, are we going to be able to do some interior detailing? So it's really just establishing, is it the right fit in the beginning? Which is just, honestly, lately it's been Zoom conversations. And it's been interesting. The contracts that I signed last summer, I'm just meeting my clients now in person.
Oh, wow.
So you kind of have this like digital rapport, interviewing, getting the contract in motion, assembling the surveys, all of the due diligence. And then finally you meet on the property and it's like, wow, this is going to be incredible.
So what materials are you into recently and why?
Oh, gosh.
Power round of questions here.
Yeah. Right now, honestly, it's the volatility of the market, right? So everyone was using white oak. Well, right now, white oak is priced extraordinarily. And so you're like, okay, let's bring ash into the mix. And like, what about maple? Can we roll that into the mix? So it's trying to stay limber in what's available. And, I'd love to stay local wherever possible, but it's been kind of a challenging year from a material standpoint. One trend I am seeing on building exteriors is people are really paying attention to longevity, durability, but wanting natural products. And so what we're seeing a lot more of is like thermally treated wood products.
I was just seeing that the other day on a project that they said the whole way through it's thermally treated, that it's like, I don't know, describe it as super kiln dried, essentially.
Yep.
And it changes kind of like the molecular structure. You don't have to do any chemical treatments to it, I don't think.
Yeah, so they still recommend on most of them like a clear coat that actually speeds up that graying, weathering, if that's the look that you want. But yeah, they're cooked all the way through and they're generally stable. They take stain beautifully if that's the look you're going for. So that's really the trend I'm seeing in exterior materials, and you're using ash or you're using pine, pine being a material that otherwise would go to shit pretty quickly. But if you get thermally treated pine, you've got a long life on that siding product.
That's interesting. We built a barn and had to side it in pine just because cedar was through the roof. Kind of wishing I'd at least gone out there with a lighter and kind of.
There you go.
What is the most underrated room in a house?
It's probably not underrated because I feel like people are appreciative of these spaces more. But I think in Maine, it's like the mudroom. It's that utility room that makes the whole house function.
Right.
I've done a lot of mudrooms. I've done a lot of mudroom combo, laundry, trash rooms, dog washing stations. It's if you want the minimalist look, you need to have really hardworking back of house. And so, and also like you need that transition from the outside world to the inside world. And so like the mudroom is like the crux of all of that. So yes, it's a utility function, but it does provide this huge function in a home to work well. And I think people are appreciative of mudrooms now. So I don't know that it's understated, but I think it's just so critical.
Yeah.
And folks from outside of Maine don't necessarily have that on their wish list. And so it's something we talk about. I like to think about kind of the family entry sequence and the guest arrival sequence, which is kind of an antiquated idea, you know, like the front door that never gets used, right? But what is that experience of the grandparents welcoming their kids to the house, and where do the grandkids drop all their shoes and all the coats versus like their daily arrival?
Right.
And so, you know, I always am looking at the property holistically, at the site plan, at the arrival sequence, saying, you know, if it doesn't work at 40,000 feet, it doesn't matter how badass our detailing is, we're not going to get there, right? So, you know, really thinking about the property holistically, and that's just one example of their arrival sequence. Like, how is family coming in? How are guests coming in? And what is the experience for both? And usually the mudroom is tied to the family entry sequence and something that can be closed off. So when the guests arrive, they're not looking at the wet boots or the hanging towels or whatever it is that's going on in the mudroom.
Yeah, I'd never really considered it in that way, but it is kind of this. It's kind of a crossroads, if you will.
Sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to think about it. When did you know you wanted to be an architect?
So I definitely was not one of those people born knowing, right? I went to school in Boston as a nursing student. And my first day of internship, I passed out. So I didn't have the...
Wait a minute. You went all the way through nursing school?
No. So I actually graduated high school early and took an internship at Children's Hospital in Boston prior to day one of nursing school.
Right.
So thank God my high school
kind of told you,
yeah,
you know what, this might not be for me.
High school internships saved me thousands of dollars, right? Because my first day of internship, I went down and I thought, you know, I have the heart, but not the head for this job.
What was it? Was it the sight of blood or?
No. So I was very committed to pursuing a career in medicine. So I'd gone to doctor camps and seen surgeries and been totally fine, because surgery is mechanical. You're just like looking through tarp, basically. So blood didn't bother me, but I'm a visceral, empathetic human being. So when someone else gets nervous, I just go down. So a dad's child was getting
oh gosh, yeah,
an IV, and the dad started getting nervous. He was playing with his keys, and then I started getting nervous. I was like, man, it's hot in here. Like, there's sweat dripping from my face. Wow. And the nurse looked at me and she was like, sit down. And the next thing I know, I'm on a stretcher, like fighting with her because she's trying to get me to drink Coke. And I'm like, I only drink diet. You know? Yeah. So it was a huge learn. And then I had to show up for, you know, I don't remember how long the internship was, a few months in the hospital, and kind of figure it out. But it was such a huge learn for me. So when I showed up to Northeastern on day one, I was like, I can't be in this major. And I was living in nursing theme housing and surrounded by people pursuing that. But they paired the nurses with the engineers per floor. So I was with engineers that were doing CAD and, you know, doing all the entry-level engineering courses. And I was trying to think back, like, well, what was I good at? You know, I took every math and science course available. Academics were always pretty easy for me. And I thought back to an art class I took freshman year, and I had gotten an award there, but I gave up art for only academics, you know, and I was like, maybe I should go back to like art. And my parents were like, you need to drop out of Northeastern if you want to do art, and go to like a state school, which is fine, you know. And I thought, well, aren't architects artists that get paid?
Not necessarily get paid.
Right. Well, usually. I learned. So I took the course load for architecture, and I was like floored. I mean, I wasn't good at it out of the gate, and it was an extreme challenge. I had never been challenged like that academically, I think. And I got addicted to that. Like as an athlete, like just like having something being that challenging and feeling like you're majoring in arts and crafts was so much fun.
Right.
So I was like, game on, let's do the architecture thing. So
yeah, I had a friend that went through architecture school, and he kept sending me photos or telling me about what he was doing, and I was just like, geez,
yeah,
you can do that?
yeah. It's totally different because you're not studying for exams or writing huge papers. I mean, you are a little bit, but in your focal architecture course load, you're drawing and you're building
Right.
things, and
It's kind of process learning in a way.
100%. And you're graded on your presentation,
Right.
like your ability to speak to work and to put the best work out there.
Mm.
And what I loved is that it was hand in hand for effort and output. Like the more time you put into a drawing, the better it was. Like the more time you put into a model, the better it was, which that's not how it works in academics. Like some people can go into an exam and get an A, and some people can study all night and go in and get a C. It's not that one-to-one relationship. But in architecture, I found it was. And as a hard worker, I was like killing it. You know, I was like, yeah, I'm going to work really hard and do the architecture thing. And I was very lucky to go to Northeastern University where we did internship half the year, and I loved it.
That's so amazing to me that you are socially receptive and empathetic enough to be affected by someone else's nervousness at that level. That's like, and in one sense, that's got to be a huge asset, like really incredible asset. And then on one sense, well, it eliminates you from being a nurse.
Totally. Yeah. It's a little bit of a liability, but yeah. I mean, I used to work in an open office environment, and you're kind of like this sponge. Like you just take on the, you know, the vibe and how other people are feeling. And with my clients, I try to be that like very steady hand that's confident, and because they're going through this emotional up and down through the design build process. I mean, it's family money, it's huge decisions, it's a huge tact for most people to build a custom home. And so I feel like I get to be kind of that level steady Eddie for them and in those experiences. But
yeah, I have a friend who I believe her first day on job nursing is tonight, I think, which congratulations, Dana. She went all through nursing school and knocked it out of the park. And I've seen her in situations that were extremely high stress, and it focuses her. Like just like, and I was with her when her husband got hit by a car, and it was just, and she called me, and she was, okay, Trent, what we're gonna need to do is, and I'm like, your husband's almost dead next to you, and you're this, like, she was boom, like it's so weird because the rest of the time she's like, whoa, but that kind of thing happens. I was like, wow, and she's just kind of born for it, you know. It's very interesting. But yeah, it is just so interesting to me how different people respond and have talents and abilities in such different ways, because I always just, my default mode is to think that everyone's like me. Yeah. And it's just so not true.
Yeah.
But
well, it is fun to be an observer, right? To like pick up on other people's, I don't know, personalities. And
yeah, it's weird for me. I have to translate those things. I have to like, I don't naturally know what they're saying. I have to like, oh, that means, and what that might mean is, and so like I'm like, my RPMs have to go way through the roof for me to actually sometimes pick up on, like, if I'm going to be able to do that to anyone. There's certain people that I can just talk with and it's not a struggle. And there's other people where I have to really try and work at understanding and maintaining. And yeah, I don't know how to do those things. So luckily my job doesn't depend too much on that. All right, we have our power round of questions that we're going to finish out here. What underscores all of your work?
I like to think that there is a quietness to the work, that it isn't overly overwrought and it's not overly harsh. And there's some depth to the work. And, you know, we've talked about it a lot, but it's really, you know, the resolution and the execution of details. Like, wow, someone really thought this through.
Right.
But in a way that feels quiet and restrained. And, well, of course, this feels right.
Right.
You know, that's the magic. And hopefully the through line in the work that people feel in those spaces and see in the photography. And, you know, I'm hopeful it's the consistent hand.
How would a good friend describe your style?
Blunt? No. I think I recently gave a talk for...
I would definitely not describe your style as blunt. It's like you were saying earlier. It's like someone used a scalpel to, you know, very carefully put this all together, very detailed, but also not voluptuous and over the top.
Yeah,
it's
blunt,
a restrained,
like
careful.
Forward.
Yes.
But I was recently giving a talk for Perkins and Will, and the person who introduced me was a former, you know, boss colleague, and he described the work to Deborah Burke, who, I mean, I was like, that was the greatest compliment I could have received in my career. I mean, that her work is phenomenal. And, you know, there is a quiet restraint to her work, and that's hugely aspirational. So I think if I can continue to keep that work at that level, you know, the work that I've been doing the last few years has been very Maine vernacular, you know, gabled boxes with glassy links. You know, that's what people want. It's of its time. It's very Maine. It's very classic. It will be timeless. And the work that I'm receiving right now, people are really pushing it. Like, I want Florida modern, or I want James Bond villain house, you know, on a cliff on an island, you know, and it's not for everyone, right? Like, there are going to be people who see that work and think, wow, I don't like it. You know, it's subjective. Everything that we do is subjective, right? And so I think having this new company able to take on some more riskier work, but really exciting work. But I am hopeful that you'll still know when you go on the property, wow, this is a Jessie house.
James Bond villain house. There's a field that I drive past going home where there's just this really long stretch of a view down this kind of corridor in a field that opens up. And I always think it would be so cool to put just like a very Philip Johnson glass house, kind of single level, all glass, very planar, just right in the middle of it, no landscaping except for maybe just one tree next to it, and a completely straight driveway. Like, it would just be such a brutal, like, sink, but just so like minimal, you know. I just always see stuff like that. I'm like, this would be fun there. That's what I'm always doing when I see spaces. I imagine where and what kind of house I would put in that space. I guess that's just because of my background and what I shoot. But yeah, my wife's always complaining, like, you're always wanting to ruin the best location on anything that we look at or where we're at. Like, you just want to but don't you want to look at that space? And I was like, no, I want to be in that space looking out, and different approaches, I guess. Yeah. Can you describe the evolution of your work?
I think there's like a tightness to the work. It's hard to describe my evolution because I feel like it's an evolution of clientele in a way. I think the clients that I was working with when I started practicing in Maine were second home in the homes for only a small period of the year. Very kind of luxury but quaint, like very Maine cottage. And now we're seeing a younger clientele come to Maine, want to set up shop here year round, and they want to like killer glass, lots of steel. They want to push the envelope. And so the work has kind of just evolved with the clientele. And so there's a part of me that will always respond to cottage style, you know, that's what I grew up with. And then there's a part of me that loves to push the minimalism of the more modernist, you know, people like Carol Wilson, et cetera, that just, you know, are doing incredible modernist work in Maine. And, you know, I want to be one of those as well. So, yeah, I think it's not necessarily a personal evolution as much as a clientele evolution. But now it's getting to be really fun. I've been working with the same structural engineer for 9 years. Like, I get it. Like, we know how a building goes together. Like, I know the moment frames. Like, I know the details now. And what's amazing is then once you figure out the process, then you get to explore everything else. So I'm not worried about what is that sill detail going to be at this giant multi-slide. Like, I've already done it. I've done it like 6 times. Like, where am I going to put my focus now? You know, I figured out what looks like there. So that's where it gets, to be fun and enjoyable, is like really choosing where to put your focus. And, in time you learn and you have your team established, and it's usually pretty smooth sailing and you get to have some fun.
Yeah, I wonder that it seems to me like Maine is in a state of pretty intense growth right now from my perspective. I keep running into people that are moving here from away, like a lot more than I used to. And that goes for like people in the inland areas, like in the mountains, like you name it. And I think COVID has and I think political situations and COVID have had a huge effect on that. Just policies in places like California have just made tax and business issues a burden, and the property values in those areas have gone sky high. And people still kind of view Maine as this kind of, in a way, not chaotic, but kind of unknown that has potential, but that you can also see has incredible beauty and, relatively low cost of living, not in the tax bracket as far as your income and everything else, but the cost of housing and everything else, although it has gone up significantly recently. Up to this point, I've run into just so many people that are like, no, we had to get out of California because it was either too crowded or just too expensive, and we just wanted to be somewhere where the pace of life was a little slower. But getting a lot of those type of people, and
secrets out.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Fortunately and unfortunately. Yeah. It's kind of like Biddeford. I mean, when I got back here in March, I remember driving down Main Street and seeing this girl in her, I don't know, maybe early 20s, attractive, well-dressed, but like she was on a mission and she had no time for anybody. And you never see that on Main Street, Biddeford. In the past, it was like that girl would be in danger, And where in the past, in the summer, it would be like most of the men were shirtless just because there's nothing going on. And, and a few years ago, it got to where the men started to kind of like, maybe I should put a shirt on,
Yeah, yeah.
And now it's, wealthy young people that, there's kind of like, well, they're here with their parents' money. And it's kind of, great, we're gentrified. Well, it's kind of what we fought for. And now it's happening. And there's a little bit of like, I don't know how I feel about this, but it's inevitable. How do you not improve a place and expect the values to not go up and the people who can afford those values to follow? So it's just the process of how it works. And a lot of people talk a lot about how to, avoid, negative gentrification like that. But yeah, it's interesting because, there's some degree of like, well, I got in and I have mine, but then all these other people see it and they want to come in, and then it gets crowded, and then it's weird. But hey, what are we going to do?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, with climate migration, people are really seeing the value of Maine. Like we have coastline that's still available to be developed, and it's all, bedrock underwritten for most of it. So it's like pretty well protected, and we're in a cool, wet environment, which is going to be really sought after. And, people are making moves from California to Maine, and
we have water.
We have water. And what Maine has not offered in the past is industry. And we have not come a long way, in my opinion, for, jobs at a high level in Maine, but people are able to work remote. So it's opened up a whole new cast of characters potentially to come work in Maine. And, I think Maine was just rated one of the worst places to retire based on, taxation and inheritance laws, et cetera, et cetera. And, that's so unfortunate. Like, that should be, really addressed. But I think, Maine has been maybe one of the slower states in New England to develop popularity, and the property values kind of reflected a much lower stance than the rest of New England. And now I feel like we're just catching up. We're just beginning to see values get closer to New Hampshire and Massachusetts, but
Right.
it's still, from a regional standpoint, so affordable.
A lot of the days that I work in Boston, people are just kind of like, why do you live in Maine? They just
can't figure it out.
comprehend it. And when I'm driving home, I'm like, yeah, this is why I live in Maine. It's quiet. I can hear birds, but how long will that last? And who knows? Yeah. Where do you find inspiration?
This is so cheesy, but whenever I just need like a lift, like I'm on Pinterest. Like I'm image onboarding. Like I'm inspired by other people's work on a daily basis. And if I want to get fired up, I'll, start looking at other people's architectural work. I mean, that to me is going to elevate my own work. And so, I'm continuously inspired by past and present other architects and what they're up to. And really,
top 3 architects for you to get you inspired.
Great question. So,
to be fair, I can't even list 3 architectural. I can list 1 that I know of as I don't follow other architectural photographers. I don't know a lot about architectural photography outside of what I'm doing, which is kind of weird. I don't know why I'm that way, but I am.
Well, I think it's challenging to keep track of architect history, right? Like pretty horrible at that, in fact. But if I look at my bookshelf, like whose work am I looking at? Well, first of all, like Stephen Harris' work, I feel like is just phenomenal and aspirational in so many ways. Deborah Burke, just really amazing. Bates Massey, Olson Kundig's work, McKay Lyons. I mean, there's a lot out there, and there's just some of those big names. I do love Carol Wilson's work. Like I have her monograph. I look up to her in so many ways. It's kind of being maybe not the first. I'm sure there was modernists before her, but really paving the space for women and other
incredibly
architects.
Talented. And I've been lucky enough to photograph some of her projects, and I've been lucky enough to, through that process, get to know her. And she's just got an incredibly good thought process. She's direct, which I love. She doesn't beat around the bush a lot, but she's very pleasant at the same time, Yep. And I've always appreciated that about Carol. I've never been able to get her in for a podcast though. I think she's busy or,
Yeah.
But I'd love to be able to get more into her thinking and stuff, because she's very accomplished and she's
huge history.
Yeah. To get the work done, even that she designed at the the times that she's designed it in her early career is very impressive. And the lack of even hardly any marketing that she does or anything, and she's still one of the most prominent in Maine. It's very interesting. Are you inspired by any artist, designer, or designer outside of architecture?
I wouldn't say a designer, but Kobe Bryant gets me really fired up.
Kobe Bryant. Interesting. Outside of the realm of what I thought you'd be pulling from.
Yeah. I don't know. I grew up playing sports, and I love kind of that mindset stuff.
His Mamba Academy and his mindset from the little that he started a whole kind of media and sports training empire before we lost him. That was he was
you've
got quite a mind and you're going for this.
Totally. Just like listening to clips and the way his mind worked and how hard he drove at his craft. I mean,
Yeah.
it's inspirational, and it's so silly, but like I go and shoot hoops. Like that's like fun for me because he gets me like that fired up, and I'm like not a good basketball player, right? So yeah, and I love listening to like podcasts about, ultra athletes and the science. I think it just says so much about our human capacity and what we're capable of. And
did you watch The Last Dance?
Sorry. I did.
That would just some of the interviews with Jordan, like the intensity of focus, insane. Just insane. And I saw a clip of him recently. I don't know if it was taken recently, but he was talking about coaching. And he was saying, like, I'll never be a coach. I'm too intense. And it would be unfair for me to take what I do and expect that of others. Like, he knows that about himself. And he's just crazy intense.
Totally. Yeah. Such a gift. And I remember my dad was really into basketball. So he was like in the era of like Bird and Jordan and back in the day, and sort of I was in school at Boston when the Celtics were just like killing it. So it was so much fun. All the teams were killing it in that 2004, 2009 era. So just an incredible time. But for me, like I love like power yoga, and like I've gotten into like lifting recently, and playing pickleball and basketball, like anything, the physicality to step away from the computer and really just like be in your body and like test your limits. And I used to be an avid runner, and every runner gets to a point in the run where they're like, I cannot go on. And it's all just like mind work. And if you can bring that into your craft and what you do and that intensity, I mean, it's a remarkable opportunity. But I found when I was teaching at University of Maine and, with prior colleagues, like I didn't realize everyone wasn't wired as intensely as I was. Like I thought we all just like worked that hard. And I quickly learned that wasn't the case. But I continue to just marvel at the athletes, and that kind of motivates me, much more outside of architecture.
I wonder if there's that's interesting. Like I'm hypercritical in everything I do, and I'm pretty sure it's not standard operating procedure for most humans, as critical as I approach things, both self and I just liberally will dose it on to people who are innocent and don't need my critical, So the way my wife grew up and how she interacts with things and the way my family interacted with things and approached things was very different. Both my parents would talk and discuss and critically approach things, and jokingly and teasingly to beyond where is even healthy at times. And there's an advantage in it in that everything I do, I have a questioning, like, did I do that well enough? Did I give everything I could to that? Could I do it better? How could I improve it? It's always there. It's always driving me. Like I got an image out of focus for like a job that I did that was essentially a favor. It was a very low cost job. I took my son with me to assist, and it wasn't a big deal, and it was a very small project, but I got one shot where I think I just totally forgot to focus, and it's like I've had this feeling in the pit of my stomach for like a week now, for this,
Yeah.
And it's just like there's something about that sits with you, that drives you, but can also drive you crazy. And
that's why you're so good at your work, because you care. And if you didn't come to the table with that sort of self humility and criticism, like you wouldn't be where you're at, right? So it's like you got to take the plus and minuses,
Right.
It's like if you weren't so critical, you wouldn't get the shots that you get.
Yeah.
You have to. I had a professor in college say you have to develop an opinion,
and you have to be able to defend it.
True, but it's like having the confidence to say this is better than that.
That's hard.
And that's the only way that you get better, right? So if you didn't walk onto a job site and be like, this shot is better than that, you wouldn't be doing your job, right? So like, for me too, like you're making subjective decisions all day long, and you have to come to the table with the confidence that no, this is better than that. Like that's your value,
right?
And it wouldn't be where it's at without that self sort of criticism, that self motivation, and being reflective and looking back at your prior work and saying, I could make this better by this.
Right.
Every project I walk through, there's room for improvement. If there wasn't, I wouldn't be growing.
Right. The classic example that I'll round this out with for me as an example of how different people can be and where different people play different roles and the different ways that they succeed. Because my wife's very successful at what she does. People just gravitate towards her, and she loves PT, and she's incredible. She's not critical though. And which means that she doesn't operate around PT as much as a creative, progressive, finding new ways of doing things, I don't think. But what is available and what is known is in her head, and she never forgets it. And she has the interpersonal skills and communication to transfer that to the people she's working on and help them learn to value what she's teaching them, and the results actually happen for improvement within that person. A guy that she works with who's like in his 80s, he's the guy who's like went out and figured out how to do all this stuff, but he'll try and teach it, and he's all over the place when he's teaching it, and it takes someone like her to like organize him into being able to, So for me, the difference between her and I and how I work, which I think is a little bit similar to how you work, this personal drive and this critical mind, developing an opinion and putting it out there and trying to defend it. It's a different process in a way, a different value of getting to a different place in a different manner. But her and I, Amber and I, were on some anniversary trip at the Norumbega up in Camden. It's like this old castle-like thing, and we went big and got this the library room, right? And so we're in this room, and it's got like an upper deck where you can go up and walk around.
Cool.
It was the library back when the place was not a hotel or whatever. And I'm sitting there like, all right, I should find something to talk about. And so I'm like, how could we make this any better? That was my thinking of, well, what I do is improve things, and so I think critically about them. And she's sitting there just taking this incredible moment in. We're just both laying there in the bed. She's got a book reading, and I'm kind of like, well, let's talk. How could this be any better? And to her, that was like, why would you be critical at a time like this? And I'm like, no, critical thinking for me is fun. I'm looking at a challenge. I don't know how this could be better, but maybe if we get critical, we could figure it, And it's like those two different perspectives are both incredibly needed. If everyone was like me, it would suck. And if everyone was like her, it would suck too. But because we have that difference, throughout the population, we can come together, work together, and actually discover and progress, but also transfer and use that progression to actually improve life and make it better for a multitude of other people because of, people that can take what gets established and disperse it amongst the masses, I guess. But I'm all the way off course there, and that's a great way to wrap things up because that's how this goes. Anything else that you were thinking we should talk about, or anything else, or have I just worn you out completely and you want to take a mind break?
Yeah, I'm pretty exhausted. No, this has been so wonderful, and I love to just chat it through with you. And
well, I'm really, really excited to see more of your work coming on Instagram or anything else, because I know you're hyper talented, really good at what you do. And to hear about some of the requests, you're kind of getting and working with being even more kind of modern and different and everything. To me, that's all extremely exciting stuff. Hope to work with you soon because your work's incredible. So Keep doing what you do. I know you're going to be insanely successful and already apparently are. Like, this is not even a thing for you to be concerned about. I'm more concerned for you than you are,
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Cool. Well, again, thank you so much for coming down here. Please check out Jessie's upcoming design theory article in the, I think, November-December issue is what I had said it in the intro, and I'm sure it's going to be great. I'll actually read it. I very, very rarely actually read articles, but some I do. So, hey.
Awesome. Thank you, Trent.
Thank you.